also presented our $6 million contract with special command with the government. And that was very exciting because we got an approval from the government to allow us to present, because usually they're very strict about sharing information, especially when it involves military personnel. So they knew how big Metabolic Health Summit was, and they knew how important it is to tell the world that, one, how important and interesting the research that we're doing around ketone metabolism and cognitive and physical performance, and two, how active the government is actually supporting these efforts, and they're actually, actively funding these efforts to investigate as well, to reaffirm all these theories, all these hypotheses around ketones. Is it really helping with cognitive and physical performance? Is it really helping with altitude sickness? Is it really helping with hypoxia? And that's where we come in and provide the products, and worked with IHMC as our research collaborator, and they do all the clinical work.
All right, Latt, we're live now. And I want to say thank you for sharing some time with me today. I'm super excited to chat all things ketones and who is Latt and how did you get into this world? And I think for many people, it's different. And I think we know that. So one, thank you for joining me on the Great Matters podcast. And first question I have is, how you feeling today?
Good, very good. Thank you very much. It's a very sunny day today in San Francisco. It was really hot yesterday. I don't know what it is in Fahrenheit, but it was 34 degrees, 35 degrees Celsius. So it was comparable to Malaysian heat. So it was very uncomfortably hot. And San Francisco, San Franciscan homes generally do not have air conditioning. So I had to just bear with it. But today is much better. I got cooler. It's sun's still out. So thank you for having me. And I'm excited to chat about, both on education side and also in life, because I think you have a lot to share from your life as well. I'm curious to find out more as well.
Awesome. Yeah. And this, I think today actually is exactly 1 year since I moved to Florida from North Carolina. And so I'm still getting acclimated to the random storms in the afternoon, to it dropping 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and then it being blistering hot and humid at the same time later on. So today is one of the cooler days. We just had a cold front come in and some rain. So definitely feel you on that. And yeah, likewise, man, I've really got to enjoy knowing a little bit more about you since our previous conversations. And we're going to do some more of that today. And I'm glad to know you're excited. And really to start things off, I think if I remember correctly, you and I got directly connected via LinkedIn after Metabolic Health Summit made a post about H.V.M.N. being a big partner of Metabolic Health Summit this previous year. And my listeners, they know about Metabolic Health Summit. They know I've been a big fan. I've attended many years. I was very disappointed I couldn't make it because you guys were there, and then my good friend Miles was there, which you had a chance to meet. So I guess to kick things off, how did you enjoy MHS and having the pleasure of meeting Keto Mammoth himself, Miles?
It was an amazing experience this year for sure, because my first time at Metabolic Health Summit was, I believe, 2 years ago before pandemic. It was 2020. And I was just there as a participant. It was my first time. I just moved to the US. I just joined H.V.M.N. I just got into, learning more about ketone metabolism, because previously my expertise was more under diabetes metabolism, cardiac metabolism in the diabetic heart. So I was just getting to know all these new areas of metabolism, especially with regards to ketones, as well as knowing these people who are so actively researching ketone metabolism. So that was 2 years ago. So this year we went there, we have our booth, we have our presence, we have our product to give out, and we also presented our $6 million contract with special command with the government. And that was very exciting because we got an approval from the government to allow us to present, because usually they're very strict about sharing information, especially when it involves military personnel. So they knew how big Metabolic Health Summit was, and they knew how important it is to tell the world that, one, how important and interesting the research that we're doing around ketone metabolism and cognitive and physical performance, and two, how active the government is actually supporting these efforts, and they're actually actively funding these efforts to investigate as well, to reaffirm all these theories, all these hypotheses around ketones. Is it really helping with cognitive and physical performance? Is it really helping with altitude sickness? Is it really helping with hypoxia? And that's where we come in and provide the products, and worked with IHMC as our research collaborator, and they do all the clinical work. So overall, I would say it's an amazing, enriching environment. And from that, I also met some new friends. Met you, for example, like from LinkedIn. All I saw was you saying that you love our product, and straight away I asked my team, "Are we working with Josh? He looks like he's a fan of the product, and he looked like he has, a following, and he has his life values and principles that align with ours. Are we working with them?" And they're like, "Not that we know of." So here we are, and we're on podcasts, and we're talking and sharing notes. And I think that's what's so great about like events like that.
Yeah, and I mean, I think I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember exactly, but I think MHS's slogan is "Where Science Meets Society" or something like that. So it's a great way to bring people like myself that I consider, the civilian. I'm a nerd at heart. I love learning, and I never thought that would be the case. But as I've gotten older, I've gone through life. I'm like, man, I need to know more, and I'm always like, how does this work? Why does this work? So getting to be at a place where experts like yourself can be presenting, but then interact with people like myself, and really help us bridge that gap of, okay, what is this? How is it valuable to me, and how can I implement it and integrate it into my life? I think that's super important. And that's why I really love, of many things, one of the things that MHS does really well is combining people like you and me, and the brands, and then the society, and then the scientists and the researchers and the doctors from around the world. It's a beautiful thing, and I really appreciate that. And you got to present, as you mentioned. So I'm curious, how was that experience for you in that environment, and how well received was it?
It was, presentation is not foreign to me. So I've always enjoyed public speaking, presentation, whatnot. But I think carrying the weight of me representing the company, HVMN, and me representing SOCOM to a certain extent, obviously that has a bigger pressure. And I just wanted to make sure that all the information and knowledge that I presented reflected accurately what is going on in the scientific world, in the theory world, in the application world, with regards to cognitive and physical performance in hypoxia. So that experience was quite amazing. And in terms of reception, I was quite positively surprised, because we had so many people lining up to ask questions afterwards that we actually ran out of the allocated 15 minutes, when the organizer had to step in and tell the people at the back of the line and say, "Hey, we actually ran out of time. So if you want, you can go up to the presenters themselves and ask these questions directly, rather than asking on a public forum in the room." So I think the reception, people are very interested. People are interested in performance. There were people who are interested in just in general metabolic health. There were people who were ex-military. There were nutritionists who dealt with military before, and they knew the challenges that we face. So they all came up and talked a bit about themselves and about their experience, and then asked the scientific question as well as the application questions that may follow from the knowledge that we have gained from this study.
Yeah, and it's such a beautiful thing when you get done presenting or speaking at any type, when people want to ask questions, they want to learn more, and they want to get more time with you. It's always something that I think for me personally, it's really fulfilling to know I did my job, and it did it so well that people are curious about wanting more. And I never thought that me getting on stage that would have that experience. So I'm glad to know. And I know from what I was told from people, friends of mine that were there, that the HVMN booth was pretty populated. And so I know there was a lot of interest, and I'm stoked to see that it was well received, the presence of you and HVMN's team being there. And you mentioned a key word, which I know my audience is not foreign to, is metabolic health. And that's something that I never thought that I'd be as passionate about as I am today. And it all started with reading the book Grain Brain by Dr. David Perlmutter for me in 2013, really getting introduced to what metabolic health was, and the word ketones and ketosis and keto and all that. So this was about 9 years ago, before it was a big buzzword. And I'm curious for you, what really allowed you to stumble upon metabolic health and get fascinated with ketones specifically?
Um, that's a question that sort of brings me down memory lane, because growing up, I have always observed my mom's side of the family who are who have a large proportion of them who are obese. They're clinically obese, they are overweight. Diabetes is very prevalent in my mom's family. So growing up, I was overweight myself, thinking that this is the fate of my life, what I'm going to be evolving into. This is so seeing my relatives is essentially seeing my future self, because I didn't know better. I didn't know the knowledge. And as I learned more about physiology, metabolism, I did my undergrad in Nottingham University in biotechnology. And because it's a biotechnology course in undergrad, it's very broad. So I learned everything from animal physiology to nutrition to food science to microbiology to immunology. So the more knowledge I accumulated, the more I realized that no, this is not a fate that is locked in. This is not a destined path for me to be obese and get diabetes and all that, if I can do something about it. And that was when I started exercising. I started changing my lifestyle. I gave up smoking. I lost weight. And then I moved to New York, did my master's in biotechnology as well in Columbia University, focused more on drug regulatory affairs and drug development. That was when I realized, on top of all these knowledge and theory, how does that translate to pharmaceuticals? How does that translate to metabolic or therapeutic targets and improve people's life? And then I move on to my PhD at University of Oxford in physiology, anatomy, and genetics. That was what my DPhil was in. And my thesis was metabolism of type 2 diabetic heart in hypoxia. So that was when I married between knowledge around pharmaceutical as well as physiology, and look at biochemistry and molecular biology in the cardiac metabolism. And then, tying all of that together into a more wholesome approach of lifestyle intervention, because all these chronic diseases are essentially preventable. Yes, there are pharmaceutical, there are medications that may help, but ultimately they also manifest because of some form of dysfunction in lifestyle practices, in nutrition, in activities. So fixing those first may actually have a more pronounced effect compared to just putting Band-Aid on the symptoms with pharmaceuticals and medications.
Yeah, so it sounds similar to me, and how I got inspired to go down this route was a personal circumstance that we found ourselves in, and then kind of seeing what would, be our reality moving forward if nothing changed. And that's what I think the biggest shift for me that came from reading that book was the power, like the empowerment we have, and learning about epigenetics and largely to how we can control the destiny of our health moving forward in our life, and what that may look like, may feel like, what we may experience. And I had never known about that. I had never been introduced to that until that book. And I was like, wow, like there is something we can do. That whole "it runs in my family" is nothing more than habits and conditioning runs in the family. But like we aren't destined to become sick and ill. So I really love that. And it's crazy because now you're the lead researcher at HVMN, and I'm curious, one, how did that experience come to be for you? Because I know there's a story of you moving to San Francisco. And so kind of walk us through, like, how did you go from being passionate about this and making that change for yourself and helping other people to now being, playing the role that you play today at a company like HVMN?
So I guess I have to start with after my PhD. So a lot of people, they do a PhD, and I gave a lecture, 2 lectures in the past 2 days to a group of undergrad students at University of Malaya, because I'm an elite fellow there for the Department of Pharmaceutical Sciences. So they asked me, should I do a PhD? Should I do a PhD? If I'm in science, do I need a PhD to succeed? And to that, I say, you got to follow your passion. If your passion is in research and academia, yeah, then do it. But then you can also look at it how I did, where I did my PhD. I knew I didn't want to stay in the lab. I knew I wanted to impact lives of others and actually translate the knowledge that I've learned in the lab to consumers, to general population. So with that passion in mind, I put myself through the PhD training, even though I didn't want to end up in the lab like for the long run. I went through the training because I want to understand how scientists do it, how they discover, how they problem solve, how they design the studies, so that I can then bring that and bridge the gap between science and business, right? So right after my PhD, I went back to Southeast Asia. Within 2 months, I got a job at a diabetes management program company called Hallmusk. I was the director of business development, so I was essentially being the point person where I'm the expert, subject matter expert in diabetes, but also at the same time being able to explain what the benefits are in the diabetes management program to different parties, different stakeholders, such as payers, insurers, employee benefits, employers themselves, looking at cost savings when they have less chronic diseases. We're looking at healthcare providers. How do they get better clinical outcomes? So tying all that, from an intervention point of view to a cost benefit point of view as well. So that was my role. So I did that for about a year and a half. And then I quit the job, and then I came out and started my own company in health tech. And that is primarily trying to use chatbot or AI to essentially explain blood test results to people. Because in Malaysia, at that time, I went from Singapore back to Malaysia and started my company in Malaysia. And in Southeast Asia in general, especially the elder generation, they're very dependent on doctors. They don't really understand what the blood tests are like. They don't really understand what does it mean to have high LDL or too low HDL or too high triglycerides, for example, or too high glucose. All they know is that, okay, the doctor can interpret it for us. And you tell me if I need to go on medication, and I'll go on medication. And that's that. So the goal here is, one, encourage people to do more annual examinations for health exams, and two, to at least give them some form of insight so that they know roughly what these numbers mean and what these terms mean. What's glucose? What's hemoglobin? What's triglycerides? What's lipoproteins? And that way, it may give them some motivation to do the test next year and see how they improve. Or if they are on the trend of going into metabolic health diseases or metabolic syndrome, then the improvement in numbers should give them motivation to stay healthy and stay active. So I did that for a year and a half until I caught up with the previous research lead of HVMN, Dr. Brianna Stubbs. So Brianna and I, we did our PhD from the same lab in University of Oxford, the Cardiac Metabolism Research Group. And so we haven't caught up for a while. So we thought of, we caught up over Skype. We talked for half an hour, and she was like, hey, by the way, H.V.M.N is looking to hire. Would you be interested? I was like, why not? I always liked, living abroad. I've always, this also brings me back, being a Malaysian student on a Malaysian scholarship, going to University of Nottingham in the UK, going to Columbia University in New York. I always bring my pride as Malaysian and represent Malaysia on an international stage, on an international level, and have that professionalism, that level of intelligence, intellectual capacity, and show people that this is what Malaysians can do. And this is funny because I think last month Michelle Yeoh gave a talk here in San Francisco, and she's actually from the same hometown I'm from in Malaysia. So I was like, that's, and she always talks about where she's from, and proud of where she's from, and she became someone I have very high respect for, with all the things that she's achieved in her life as well. So coming back to the interview, so Brianna sent in my CV, and then I got interviewed by Jeff and Michael, the two co-founders of the company, and they really appreciated my experience both in the scientific lab setting and the startup business setting. So they flew me in June 2019, and I met the entire team, throughout the week. And at the end of the week, they already offered me an offer for the job, and they almost half pressured me to like give them an answer right away. Is it a yes or is it no? Like I was like, well, I guess it's a yes. I mean, it's a nice city. It was my first time in San Francisco as well. It was my first time. They got me an Airbnb, stayed for a week, went to the office, met everyone. Everyone was so smart as well. They're like MIT, Stanford, I'm, having all these backgrounds. And I was like, I can learn a lot from this. I can grow as an individual as well as a professional in this setting. And 2 months later, in August, end of August, I got all my visas sorted out. They paid for my visa, and they flew me over. And here I am 2 years later. Actually, when I first started, I did not even know much about the military contract until I started my job. And they're like, you're now the PI of this contract. And I learned everything about metabolism, and I forged a relationship with HMC. And I have to say that was one of the best experience ever, to be able to understand US military structure, understand what their interests are, and actually, give back to the community in terms of what can we do with the science. They are all about application. They don't really care how many papers you publish. If the product is in their hands, they experience it. And if it really helps, they're all for it. So that's very interesting. And then working with HMC as well, very high credible, very high caliber and credible research institution. So I had, great pleasure learning from them as well. So
yeah, I love that. And thank you for sharing that, because there's two things that stand out to me. And one of them is what I've been learning the last 12 years of my life, since the first brain tumor diagnosis to 10 months ago being awake for a second brain surgery. And that is, we may not be clear on what the future vision looks like in the micro, but in terms of the macro, we have this idea of how we want to live our life. And you brought us through a beautiful story of like how the micro kept unfolding to the point of where you are today and how that came to be. But you were just so focused on, overall what you wanted to do, why you wanted to do it, and what you wanted to experience. And then you just, I would say, maybe embrace the journey, the process of unfolding. And then now here you are, which allowed us to meet. And then you're doing some amazing things. And the second thing you mentioned, well, the second idea that came from something you mentioned, was you're representing in Malaysia the best you can, and being proud of where you come from, and letting people know that you're from there. And I found that for me personally, coming from where I'm from in America, I always, even when I moved and I was competing and I lived in this town away from where my hometown was, I always put Cape Cod, Massachusetts. Like I always put where I was originally from. And I never really understood until the last few years why I did that. And now it's really clear to me. And I want to see if it's the same for you. But for me, I wanted to inspire the people that come from, or that are from where I come from. I want to let them know that like, hey, like I'm doing something awesome. Like I love my life, and like I want you to know like you can do it too. Because a lot of people, where I come from, not a lot of people do the things that I've been able to do, and I think that everyone has the opportunity to. So it was really important for me to represent where I come from, even though it'd been 6-7 years where I still was living in this town, training and competing from. I always put where I was from, my hometown. And so, was it something similar like that, like inspiring the people that you're from?
Absolutely. I think that, especially, looking at 2 days ago, when I was giving the lecture to these undergrads, that's exactly what I want to say. Like I mentioned, I'm from Ipoh. It's a small town. I made it here. I made it to Ivy League. I made it to Oxford. You can too. Anyone can, right? If you just keep your eyes on the prize and work on it. And I always tell people, like, enjoy the journey. That you have one life. That journey is going to be longer than your endpoint. Therefore, if you don't enjoy the journey, even if you get to the endpoint, what's it for, right? Always enjoy the journey, and I do enjoy the journey of discovering myself, learning from other people. I always tell people one lifetime is too short to learn everything about yourself and about life in general. So I always learn from other people's lifetime. And that's where I, have a lot of chats with my friends around philosophy, life values, principles. And I think that's very enriching, at least in my case. And inspiring like younger generation from Malaysia or even in Asia in general, because when I started my undergraduate in the UK, I realized that there are home students, that's the term for UK students. There are European students, the EU students, and then there are international students, which is a lump of the rest of the world. So that includes US, Asia, Africa, 3 continents, and if not, the rest of the other continents as well. So people don't see us as like, oh, he's Malaysian or da 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 da. They will look at us like, okay, he looks Asian, he's just an Asian student. So it's up to us then to stand out on our own and to make a statement and to say that, hey, I'm actually Malaysian, I'm not Chinese, or I'm actually Malaysian, I'm not Singaporean. When some people are like, oh, you sound Singaporean, and they're more adamant or they're more certain that I'm Singaporean than I am. I'm like, I'm telling you, I'm not Singaporean. Do you know what I mean? Like, there are cases like that. And it's just about making your identity known and making like, who are you? And what do you do? And what do you want to achieve? And in that process, what can you learn about yourself that help you achieve that goal?
I love that you just said that, because that's something that I've been distilling for myself the last 2.5, 3 years when I decided to stop riding BMX altogether. And thankfully, so it started out as an experiment in January 2020. And then May of 2021, I started having seizures, learned about the 5th brain tumor. And now this was in my frontal lobe, which resulted in the surgery of August of 2021. But it started out as a journey to experiment, like, who the hell am I without BMX attached to my name, which had been something I identified since I was 13. And then since I was 17, provided for myself as like a career. And so I think that that's something really important, is to figure out, who are you beneath all the things that you want? And that's where you talked about values and priorities. And for me, I learned really early on when I was 21 in 2010, diagnosed with a brain tumor after I thought I was just getting an MRI for concussion. Oh no, you actually have a large brain tumor. And then I realized something on my value list at the bottom was my health. But because I was in shape, I was young, I was living under the notion, like, if you're in shape, you're healthy. I didn't know about metabolic health. I didn't know about health being internal. And I learned the hard way. And so it really showed me my values needed to shift, which now my number one value is my own physical health and energy, because I know that that's going to help other people if I'm showing up as my best, performing as my best. And if we're all living human beings, we're a performer. It's, if you have a brain, you're a performer. And so I love that you mentioned that. Now, like, bringing it back to HVMN and your position there, I kind of want to go back. I love the mindset and the philosophy, and we're going to talk more about that. But I really want to get back to, HVMN and Ketone IQ, which is what really got me excited in the last, I say 6 months, when my friend reminded me of HVMN, and like, because of the new product that came out. Because I tried, I think what you guys are calling V1, that is no longer on the market.
The ketone ester.
And it was probably at the time still the best tasting ester I'd come across, but still not that great. But it was crazy how it helped me, because I've been one of those people that I went to Dr. Daniel Amen to get SPECT imaging done, because I was like, hey, people are saying that caffeine and ketones do all this and that. I don't feel any of it. And he helped me really understand what was going on internally because of my off the chart ADHD, as he said, but under the influence of exogenous ketones, and improved. And caffeine helped bring my prefrontal cortex up to a baseline. So all these different things. And so when I found out through a friend that Ketone IQ had come out, I was like, I need to try this. And I, really noticed 2 things profoundly. Was the appetite suppressant, like allowing me to feel good without eating for long periods of time. And I've been fasting for some years now, intermittently and extended, but that was really significant. And then the cognitive clarity, like the focus, and that type of benefit really stood out to me. So I'm curious, with all that we've talked about, metabolic health, HVMN, your journey, I'm curious to start this conversation moving forward of, why does HVMN exist and why does Ketone IQ exist?
Okay. Well, before that, I want to say, since you mentioned about your tumor, I have so much respect with to like your story was so inspiring, like surviving 5 brain tumors. And I just want to point that out to, your listeners. And I'm sure they all know about it, but I'm still very, very like impressed and aspired
Well, thank you.
by your story. So that's that, got out of the way.
I appreciate it.
And HVMN, it stands for health via modern nutrition. And the modern nutrition here is not the current existing modern nutrition that we know of, right? Where it's high consumption of sugar, high consumption of processed food. We want to promote health via the actual modern nutrition with the technology, with the knowledge, with the science that will eventually push us away from all these chronic diseases. Now that's the goal, the vision and mission, because we always say our metabolism is under attack all the time these days. So how do we improve metabolism? And as you mentioned, we used to sell ketone esters or ketone monoester. That was in 2017, and then we stopped in 2020. And because one, the taste was quite bad. Two, it was quite pricey. It was about $33 for 25 grams at that time. And you can still get it in the market right now. I think it's still quite pricey. And then three, in terms of efficacy, some papers shown that the super high, super physiological level of ketones may not have, basically not higher does not mean better. You just need a certain level past the threshold. And we're still, the science is still trying to figure out. People have been saying that, or researchers have been saying that for performance, the threshold is around 2 millimolar. Therapeutic target or therapeutic users, the threshold is around 1 millimolar. So even if you go up to like 3 to 5 millimolar, which ketone ester is very capable of doing. So if you have to go into a situation where you need that spike, that high of a spike of blood BHB level, then ketone ester is the answer. And how we came about ketone IQ is that we know that ketone ester is an esterified form of BHB and butanediol. And those two molecules are bound together with an ester bond. So that's why it's called ketone ester. And we have found a manufacturer who can manufacture pure R13-butanediol. And because of the form of butanediol, which is R, it directly converts to RBHB, which is the BHB form that is mainly metabolized in the body, as well as the BHB form that you can detect via ketone meters in your blood pricks and all the blood ketone levels. So all in all, we developed Ketone IQ to improve the price, improve the taste, as well as making sure that you can still reach that level of threshold for both performance and therapeutic users. And mind you, this is not the end either. This is only the beginning, because at HVMN, we are always striving to improve what we have. And we're already looking at different formulation to improve it further. How can we maximize certain things? How can we make sure that there is going to be even better taste that eventually will taste like soft drinks? Hopefully, we'll see, without adding sugar. So that's the goal here, and that's how we arrived at Ketone IQ, and that's what we stand for at HVMN.
I love that. And for the listeners that may not remember, BHB stands for beta hydroxybutyrate. It's one of the most well-known ketone bodies out there. I'm very confident that my listeners have heard of it many, many times, especially from Mitch and I talking, but just want to throw that out there. And I mean, what you just said, I mean, that's science, right? I mean, it's like, it's always looking to improve. It's always taking in data and understanding like, this is what we know now, but it may change moving forward. And I think that's what people, really misunderstand about science. It's not an absolute. And I think that the best scientists are very open about that. Is like, I think Dr. Perlmutter said that years ago, which is what I loved and respected about him, is like, this is what we know now. But moving forward, I'm open to being changed, having my mind changed because of new technology, new science, and all that. So I love
discovery.
that.
Yeah,
exactly. So I love that you guys are always working to improve product. And I can say, it tastes so much better than any other ester I've tried, and the
Thank
old
you.
ester I tried in the past, which I voluntarily, knew, and I went through because I was curious of the benefits. And so it's something too that I love. It's just a simple, shot, and it's like I believe the instructions say you can dilute it in different things, which is a question I want to ask you about. So remind me if I forget to ask you about the diluting of it. But I just love how quick it's to use. Like my fiance, she makes a face every time, but she does it because it makes her feel good. She actually notices the difference in some ways that I can't, which we talked about why that is, and TBIs and brain tumors and ADHD and all that. So I'm super thankful to know that there's a product out there that's what, $4 a serving now, opposed to
Yeah.
35 in the past.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's phenomenal. But also someone like my dad, who for the life of me, I have got him to make some changes lifestyle wise, but then obviously resorts back to his old ways and complains about the same things. And I'm like, well, come on, you have me as a resource. And so when he was visiting for like 5 days for just him and I golfing, I got him to take a shot every morning, and then every round we went out, and he was like, all right, I mean, I can do that. It doesn't taste great, but
Yeah.
so my question with diluting it is, I noticed that on the directions of the bottle it says you can mix it with things. I have a few questions, and just to keep this simple for the listeners, I know you and I could talk about this in depth, but how does diluting it, one, affect the efficacy? Number two, does it have a time frame to where if you were to mix it with some water, like 8 ounces of water, if that wouldn't be too much, is there like a time frame to where if you don't drink at all in that time frame, that it like lowers the efficacy? And then three, what don't you want to mix it with, if anything?
Great question. Okay, first question, diluting it, does it affect the efficacy? I don't think so, because you are still taking in, say, if you're taking in 35 mils, which is 10 grams of butanediol, you're still taking 10 grams of butanediol in your body. So that 10 grams is still going to be converted into beta hydroxybutyrate by your liver. So in that sense, it doesn't affect the efficacy. Now comes the second question, which is more important. If you don't drink that within a certain time point, will it affect? Your liver also needs time to convert the butanediol into BHB. Now, we don't know as of now how fast, and it all depends on different individuals as well, on how fast and how much your butanediol is being converted to BHB. Because some people, we have seen non-responders. We have seen people who can't actually elevate their blood BHB levels with ketone IQ. And unfortunately, we don't have a way around that at the moment. It's just something to do with their deficiency in the enzyme or the ability to convert the BDO to BHB. So the answer is I don't know. I would assume it will affect to a certain extent if you don't drink it within a certain amount of time. I would say for optimal efficiency, I would make sure you drink it within, I don't know, 15 to 30 minutes. And then if if you take a higher dose than one dose, say you have to take 4 doses, right? I would take 2 doses, within half an hour, and then you can do it another 2 doses an hour later. That way you can keep your blood BHB high and making sure that you still have that threshold reached. And then the third question, what can you make, or what can you mix the ketone IQ with? I would say trial and error, because there have been times where I think it would taste good, and then I mix it, and then I regretted it instantaneously. And there have been times where I'm like, I didn't know it would taste good. But then after mixing it, I was like, actually, it tastes pretty good. I think at Metabolic Health Summit, we tried mixes, actually. We mixed it with Olipop, so sugar-free carbonated drink, flavored, I believe, the ginger lime or ginger cucumber. I can't remember exactly what the name is, but that tasted amazing. Like you almost don't taste the aftertaste of the butanediol bitterness. So generally, I think sort of, carbonated flavored water for those people, especially those people who don't want to put, extra sugar or sweeteners in it, it does help.
So my listeners know that I love Zevia, another alternative to carbonated sugary sodas. They use stevia. I believe Olipop adds prebiotic to their sodas, if I remember correctly.
Maybe. I'm
So
not
they're
entirely
similar
sure.
to Zevia because I just seen them coming up last year or so, and a friend of mine, Mark Metry, actually introduced me to their product. But so it sounds like you want to be careful, but you want to experiment. And so I would say, because I was thinking like, what can I just mix it in my coffee? But I'm like, I think that would be a lot of flavor to add to coffee. And
Yeah.
I don't, coffee lovers, if you want to enjoy your coffee, maybe don't, but maybe try a little amount and experiment. But
Yeah.
so it sounds like there's options. And I want to go back to question number 2. That was largely inspired by my fiance, Jackie, who drinks things so slow. And I love the shot because she just gets it done and then she chugs her electrolytes or some other flavor after.
Also, on that note, we actually just released Ketone IQ shots in retails. So
Oh,
people
wow.
can actually buy little bottles of shots
That's amazing. Congrats.
that people can, put in their bags or when they're on a race and whatnot, and they can just open it and just shot it instead of bringing a whole big bottle and have to like measure it.
Yeah. No, that's amazing. I mean, I'm stoked for that. And
This
I'm
is this
just,
is very, very like news. This is I believe last week was when we sort of launched it. So I think it's still in the process of getting into the retail shops around the US. Mainly, I believe it's in LA, SF, and or California and New York.
awesome. Yeah, I'm super excited for that because I think that that's the thing I've seen with a lot of ketones in general, like exogenous ketone products, is where do you get them and can you trust them? Because I know it's gonna be confusing for people, but like the whole what is it, R versus D or
Yeah,
L? So it's like
yeah,
there's like that
RAL, yeah.
whole controversy of
Yeah.
which actually is the one you want, and then which company is using the right ones. And so
And nowadays, everyone claims that everyone calls it exogenous ketones, right? Everyone calls it ketones, even though, for example, like salt companies, they don't call it salt anymore. They just say, oh, this is exogenous DBHB ketone, which is true. It is a DBHB, but bound to a salt. So they don't mention the salt anymore because people are starting to understand that salts don't do as much as ketone esters or butanediol or diesters do.
yeah.
So it's all, a lot of marketing. And I think that's where we come in as podcasters, as people who, speak to the, general public, to educate people, to share the knowledge, right? Because DBHB is a form of BHB that is primarily being metabolized in the body, that is more common, that appears in the body. And then LBHB, it appears in a smaller amount, but the hypothesis is that LBHB is more involved in signaling versus metabolism. So with all the study around metabolism, around cognition, it's usually just DBHB. And DBHB is also the form that affects the quote unquote elevated ketones that we talk about, because the ketone meter measures DBHB. So with that said, a lot of previous generation, especially salt, it's racemic. When you hear the word racemic, it's a mixture of L and DBHB, and most of the time they don't even announce the ratio of the mixture as well. They just say it's a racemic mix. So you want to be careful when you look for exogenous ketones to consume, depending on your goals, depending on your purpose, and price point as well, obviously.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that word racemic, because that was something that I learned a couple of years ago, and I was like, oh, so it's just like anything. It's not exactly what the label says. Like you actually have to look back in the ingredient list and then do some research. And so I want to go there in a second, and it actually ties in nicely to my next set of questions. But a fourth bonus question that I thought of when you were explaining the first 3, when I thought of Jackie and her slow consumption of fluids, as I referred to it as, is, and this is a question that I keep forgetting to ask people like yourself. So I'm thankful for this opportunity. But in terms of consuming, like, let's say I took a 35 or 45 ml shot of H.V.M.N. Ketone Iq, how long from consumption to generating some type of benefit, how long does that metabolic process take from consumption to me noticing anything or generating more ATP myself, like whatever it comes, like how long does that process, is there a way of knowing, or can you tell us a little bit about that?
So if you're talking about subjective feeling, generally people feel the subjective feedback within 15 minutes of consuming it. So I believe you probably have experienced it. I've experienced it. But if you're looking at numbers and you're looking at objective measures of your blood ketone levels, you will see an elevation starting half an hour. But in our internal pharmacokinetic study, we saw an elevation in half an hour, but it keeps going up and it peaks around 2 to 3 hours. And then it starts dropping again at fourth hour. And it will stay up for almost 6 hours above 1 millimolar if you take a higher dose. And that study, it was for 0.5 grams per kilogram of body weight. So that if you're 80 kilogram, you're taking about 40 grams of ketone IQ, which is about 4 doses. So generally we advise 1 to 2 doses depending on how people feel. And I would say if you are really a biohacker and really want to know the objective measures, go measure your blood over time for sure. See what level that you want to achieve, because some people, regardless of subjective feel, they are so set on like, this is the number that I want to achieve, and that's fine. So you want to increase or decrease or dial down or up your dose to achieve that. But there are also some people who say, okay, I measure once, I know that it's going up, I don't have to look at it anymore, I just know how I feel, and I know it could be placebo, it could be actual improvement and benefit in terms of cognition. So I'm just going to practice doing it every day and go on with my activities, whether it's a podcast or a presentation or a meeting, or I'm going to the gym, I'm going for a run, and it helps me. And that's more than enough. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Awesome. Yeah. And I mean, I think subjective and objective data is really necessary to figure out where on the map we are in terms of where we want to go. We have to know where we're starting. And so shout out to our good friends, Goody Beats, Logan, and Matt Payne at BioCoach, because they offer a great way to test your biomarkers to figure out where you're at. And on that note, I think it's important to note the whole keto adaptation process, because I remember I reached out to Dr. Ryan Lowry years ago when I was like, I've been tracking my blood ketones, my glucose levels. And then now I'm like, I'm doing the same thing. Nothing's changed, but like my numbers aren't as high anymore. Is that bad? And he explained to me like, no, you're becoming more adapted. Like your cells are actually utilizing the ketones in your bloodstream. Therefore, you're not getting as high readings, which combines with people like you met my good friend, Miles. Miles has been on the podcast. People have heard about him and heard from him. The GKI is really important for someone that's dealing with drug-resistant epileptic seizures, knowing where their ketone and glucose numbers are in relation to their circumstance. That's another important factor. So it is relative to obviously the context of the person, but I'd say majority of us listening, we don't need to go chasing numbers. Really get the data subjectively. And if you want to objectively measure, that's obviously it's recommended. But like what I got discouraged was like, all right, I used to be, a 24-hour fast, I'd be at like 1.4. Now I'm at 0.9. Right. What's going on? Like, am I doing something? And it's all working out how it should be.
Yeah.
So it's just really important to consider that. So thank you for sharing that. Now, going back to racemic, my next question was going to be just simply for the listeners, to give them an understanding, simply breaking down, what is the difference between ketone IQ esters versus, other brands that make ketone salts and even other esters on the market? What sets ketone IQ apart from the rest of the market?
So, well, first of all, ketone IQ is not an ester because it's R1,3-butanediol is half of what ketone monoester was.
Perfect.
And then in terms of, let me compare it with salt first, right? So salt have been known to increase blood BHB level mildly. So it doesn't go further up than, I believe, 0.7. If you get 1 millimolar, that's really good on a rare occasion, because you can't increase the dose of ketone salt because, one, it comes with all these minerals, either potassium, sodium, magnesium. You're going to increase your salt load, right? So for people with hypertension, with other complications that may not benefit from increased minerals, that may be bad. And secondly, increasing dosage of salt also increases risk of GI issues. So that's
I've
always,
learned that the hard way. I've
yeah.
combined some
So,
ketone salts in like elemental labs, which is a gram of sodium,
yeah.
and I was in the bathroom a little while
Yeah,
after.
so
So
that's a lot of salt, right? So a lot of people, they're like, oh, what if I'm exercising and I'm actually losing electrolyte and I need to replenish electrolyte? I would rather take electrolyte and then I take my ketones. Um, just because, you know, it's easier to dose that way. It's easier to control as well where I want my ketones to be, where I want my electrolytes to be. And then if I compare ketone IQ with ketone esters, I would say the biggest comparison point is price point and taste. Um, you know, $4 per 10 grams or $10 per 25 grams versus theirs could potentially, I haven't checked their price lately, but I believe like maybe $30 to $40 per 25 grams. That's a big difference, right? And at HVMN, we want to move away from, you know, previously when we sold ketone ester, the storyline is about how elite athletes, how elite cyclists, Tour de France use ketone ester to improve performance. Therefore, you're using it for training. You're using it during season, just one off and like push yourself to the max and win the race, right? We are trying to move away from that because we saw the potential of exogenous ketones in way further than just performance, right? How can people take this every day? How can people afford this every day and actually reap the benefit from a long-term point of view? You know, we can look at brain network stability, for example. We can look at cognitive ability, memories. And all of this has shown just by taking it short term, you can see the benefit already. Imagine taking it long term, right? If you train your body to have that level of cognition, to have that level of metabolic adaptability, surely that's a good thing. But in order for people to take it every day, you got to make it taste better. You got to make it affordable. So that's where ketone IQ comes from. And HVMN is also not married to one molecule, right? As I said earlier, we are not set on just having ketone IQ, R13 butanediol being the solution that solves everything. We want ketone IQ as a name, but the molecule, if there are new molecules out there that are more efficient, taste better, cheaper, that would be the new ketone IQ. That's the goal of HVMN.
Yeah, I love that. And that's I think it's super important because that's what I've learned from being a retired professional athlete and, you know, all the things I've gone through with my brain. And what I love about HVMN and, you know, speaking with you and the rest of the team and working together is because I see such a big middle area of elite performers and then like elite executives and scientists and doctors. And there's the majority of us live in the middle. And that's what I've learned about, you know, my passion for learning the science, my passion for sharing my story. It allows people to connect with the information at an emotional level and understand how practical it is to integrate in their lives and the benefit from using it as a supplement long term. That is, like, to me, the first domino to really creating change of the lifestyle. And part of why I share so openly and authentically and vulnerably is because I learned the hard way. And I was fortunate enough to survive once, twice, three times, and so on and so forth. And I made the meaning out of it because I was able to overcome, and I was able to be willing to share with people. And all I do, especially these conversations with people like yourself, is to help other people learn from the lens of my journey, to be inspired to change from a place of joy and inspiration, to do something for their lives and to see beyond their circumstance rather than being forced to because they're in such pain and suffering. Right. So I love that mission. And that actually leads nicely into our next segment, talking about, you know, ketones being a fourth macronutrient, if you will. And so I want to see if you can just touch upon some of the benefits that people could, you know, gather from consuming ketone IQ. And then let's dive into, you know, like a little scratching the surface of a cellular level of mitochondria and how they're a part of this equation to giving us these benefits, you know, both mentally, emotionally, and physically.
Sure. So as I've always explained when people, you know, let's look at keto metabolism 101. I would explain, you know, what endogenous ketones are, what exogenous ketones are, and what ketones are in general. So ketones are just like other substrates, such as glucose, proteins, fats, where the cell can essentially use to create ATP, which is energy, right? So one uniqueness of ketone is that it can bypass the blood-brain barrier and reach the brain. And fats, because of its large molecule size, it can't bypass the blood-brain barrier. So in that sense, if somehow your brain is running low on sugar, now sugar is the primary source usually, but if there is any deficiency in sugar in your body, or if there is any insulin resistance that doesn't allow the brain to uptake, to regulate the uptake of sugar, of glucose, then you will have a deficiency in energy. And this is where ketone would come in. And for example, even when you are fasting, or if you are in starvation mode, what happens is that you run out of glycogen stores, you run out of glucose stores or carbohydrate stores. So your fat starts getting mobilized and being converted into ketones. And also fat directly also gets oxidized to produce energy. And the ketones are especially essential for the brain metabolism in that state, because you're running low on sugar, and the brain needs all the energy it can get, because despite being 2% of total body weight, so the brain weighs 2% compared to our total body weight, its metabolism actually accounts for 25% of the total metabolism of the body. So we know how big of a factor it is to in creating energy and utilizing energy. So that is why all these initial hypotheses in earlier days is to supply the brain with these molecules so that you can get the energy, because in senses of Alzheimer's, for example, there is glucose there is dysfunction in glucose metabolism. In traumatic brain injury, there is also dysfunction in glucose metabolism, and that also creates reactive oxygen species, create oxidative damage because of the deficiency and the compensatory mechanisms, and that leads to further long-term effects. And here comes ketones trying to fit in that energy gap and mitigate that damage, and hopefully also mitigate the manifestation of long-term effects that may affect memories, that may affect cognitive ability in general, eye coordination, limbs coordination as well. So a lot of things can be affected, especially when it comes to the brain, and ketones specifically can enter the brain and produce that energy. And then that is just on a metabolism point of view. On the signaling point of view, on anti-inflammatory point of view, on oxidative point of view, that's a whole different area we can also talk about as well, like how ketones have shown to decrease inflammation. And as we all know, and I have to point out as a physiologist, as a scientist, that inflammation is not all bad. Anything that, when it comes to homeostasis, when it comes to metabolism, we have to view it as everything is in moderation and everything is in balance. When you downregulate something, something else will upregulate to balance that. So inflammation is also the same. It's essentially a mechanism to adapt to either an infection, a foreign invasion of foreign materials, or a dysfunction in the body. So we need inflammation because we need that as a signal for recovery. We need that as a signal for repair. But we do know that chronic diseases are also associated with chronic inflammation. So when the inflammation doesn't switch on or off, but instead is being switched on the entire time, that's when all the bad things happen. So that's where ketones being, or any other anti-inflammatory drugs or anti-inflammatory molecules play a role here. Because if you are on chronic inflammation, lowering down that inflammation and make sure those symptoms subside, that would be helpful. So that's where it is. I'll stop there before I give too much overwhelming information to everyone.
I mean, I could just personally listen to you explain this forever. But to make sure the listeners are following, From my understanding, when we have TBIs, we have chronic elevated glucose levels, we have insulin resistance, we have Alzheimer's or any form of dementia, we have anything like that happening. From my understanding, there's two highways, if you will, of energy getting to the cell, right? We have glucose that uses GLUT transporters, and then we have ketones that uses MCT transporters, not the MCT oil, but what does it stand for?
Monocarboxylase transporter. Yeah,
exactly. So what I'm understanding and what drew me into this world of ketones and metabolic health is coming from someone who has multiple TBIs, more than I probably am aware of, on top of brain tumors and surgeries, on top of radiation, on top of life stress, on top of chronic consumption of sugar and alcohol at probably any age was terrible, let alone being 19 to 23. I was learning that ketones are beneficial for my brain and my existence because they're able to bypass the dysfunction of glucose getting to the cell using an alternative highway system, if you will. Yeah. So switching gears now to understanding metabolic disease and how these are largely an unconscious choice that we're making every day that we don't realize we have the power to do, which is what I spoke about with Grain Brain, really feeling like leaving me feeling empowered to do something about my health and my life overall. Can you help us, navigate the process of how one becomes metabolically unhealthy, or whatever the correct terminology would be in terms of glucose levels, insulin resistance, and just scratching the surface so that way people can follow? But because what you were pointing out was making so much sense to me. And I know my listeners have heard me and Mitch talk about this a lot. It's not calories is where our energy comes from. It's what calories convert to as ATP, as our body's natural currency of energy. And so when we have plentiful, energy in our body from eating processed foods or too much food in general, then that mechanism of creating energy kind of gets blocked up. And so when you have TBIs or anything like that, or chronic stress, ketones can be an alternative fuel source to help us, and like I said before, be that first domino to changing our lifestyle. So would it make sense to ask you to kind of bring us through how that whole process of metabolic dysfunction really begins, and then how it elevates, and then what we can do about it?
I mean, so I'm going to explain the way I'm going to explain this is I'm going to go backwards. I'm going to go the endpoint first, right? Okay. The endpoint, if we're looking at metabolic dysfunction, we're looking at cardiovascular disease, we're looking at diabetes, we're looking at obesity, we're looking at hypertension. So these diseases are all interlinked, and having one will almost immediately increase the risk of the others, right? So they all are tied to metabolic dysfunction. Now, let's go backwards from that. How do you even reach there? For example, for diabetes, when you are diagnosed diabetes, it has already been 15 years in the making. So it's not something that you wake up one day and your pancreatic beta cell says, I'm going to stop working and you're going to get diabetes, right? It's a damage that is happening over time because of your lifestyle, because of your nutrition, because of your physical activity, right? And there are a lot of different theories how this come about. Some people say an increase in processed food. Some people say an increase in fat consumption. Some people say it's the presence of both high fat and high sugar consumption that causes the inflammation to rise up chronically, and that creates dysfunction in all different hormones, insulin, leptin, glucagon, and even ghrelin as an appetite hormone that drives you to want to eat more. And and the same thing as you said, right? If we have such an abundance of substrates, eventually it will all go into storage, right? If you have calorie surplus, it will get stored as fat eventually. And when that happens, if you look at inflammation in the adipose tissue, and adipose tissue is the biggest fat storage in the body, which is the tissue underneath the skin layer. And they actually looked at different, insulin resistance model that started with the inflammation of the adipose tissue because of the accumulation of fat. So there is that as well. And obviously with the increase of unhealthy cholesterol, low density lipoproteins, and combination with triglycerides and all of that, you also increase your risk of heart attack because you increase the risk of occlusion of your blood vessels transporting blood into the heart and what is heart attack? It's ischemia, right? It's lack of substrates, lack of blood being flowed into the heart. And the heart, same with the brain, is a very, very essential organ that it never stops working from the point that you are alive until the point that you're dead, right? So in order for it to work tirelessly, endlessly, you need all these substrates and energy. And if you cut off blood supply, you are actually not delivering all the substrates, you're not delivering the waste out, so it causes damage, and therefore you may also increase risk of heart failure. So, overall, I think it comes from lifestyle, it comes from nutrition, it comes from physical activity, because what used to be the norm in the prehistoric human beings is people are out hunting, people are out moving all the time, versus we're having desk jobs and sitting 9 to 5 and not really moving much, eating processed food, food delivery. I mean, I'm guilty of that too, right? We all are, but it's all for the convenience and time efficiency and all that. But ultimately, balance that, right? Balance that with some form of physical activity, some form of exercise, whether it's endurance or resistance exercise. It will help you. Endurance exercise, especially as we age, it'll be very good for your cardiovascular health. Resistance exercise, as we age, is very good for to battle against sarcopenia, which is muscle loss due to aging. So as we age, if we do not do any form of resistance exercise, we do lose 1% of lean body mass or lean muscle mass per year. Wow. And when that happens, it should happen after 30 years old. And if that happens, when you grow much older, one of the main cause of mortality in elderly is just falling. When they fall, they break their bones, they puncture their organs, and they die. So ultimately, you need the muscle mass to hold on to your bones, your tendons, and support your body weight in general for your activities, going up, down the stairs, sitting up and down. And that's where resistance exercise come in. So for me personally, I do mix and match between the endurance exercise and resistance exercise, even though I know my body is way more susceptible to resistance exercise, and I do like weightlifting more than endurance. But I do try and force myself and push myself to some form of cardio one way or another, just to keep the cardiovascular health as well.
Yeah, for sure. And that's a powerful statistic. 30 years plus, if we don't do any form of resistance training, we lose 1% of body mass per year. Or muscle mass per year. That's profound. And so going back to these lifestyle things, I have in my notes, 88% of Americans are metabolically unhealthy, which is super sad. Yeah. And a large portion of it is lifestyle causes, it's choices we make. And I would even argue that it's not the things like the processed foods, the convenience, the lack of exercise, or this or that. I would say it's our relationship with X, Y, and Z. It's, in the keto community, it's like carbs are the enemy. And it's like, it's not, it's your relationship with them. And so 2 things on that note that I want to bring up is what I hear so much from my clients, especially the high performing executives and CEOs and they're like, oh, man, I'm sleeping 4 hours. That's it. That's all I can do. Or I'm, having a couple beers or glasses of wine a night. And that usually comes from, all right, what's your relationship with alcohol? They're like, oh, I don't drink much. What's not much? And then they tell me, and I'm like, so a couple bottles of wine a week or a couple 6-packs a week, like that's okay. Let's address that. So for those that think that they can sleep, 4 to 5 hours a night and still be a high performer, or those that think they can drink alcohol regularly and still be a high performer, I have 2 main questions for you. One, what are both of those doing for our metabolic health? And 2, what are both of those, in regards to sleep and alcohol consumption, sleeping less than we need to in alcohol consumption on a regular basis? What are those doing to our brain long-term? So what are those doing for metabolic health long-term? And then what are those doing to our brain long-term, which I think is the most important factor of being a human and a performer of any level.
And specifically alcohol and sleep, or that those are just
either one of them, like lack of sleep, as what that does to our metabolic response, and then any type of relationship in terms of chronic consumption of alcohol.
Right.
Either one, or just high level what both of those could be doing?
I think sleep is very interesting. Sleep study is very interesting. I'm only recently getting into sleep study. We are trying to apply for a grant together with a professor at Washington State University to look at sleep and ketones and glycolysis with regards to military, because they are trying to minimize the sleep amount, maximize their wake time, but still keep it productive. So having said that, I think definitely sleep quality trumps sleep quantity, right? So that's where we measure all this HRV and measure all the sleep quality things, Aura Ring and Whoop Band or whatever to measure your sleep quality. So I think to a certain level, some people who claim that they can be high performance even with less sleep, they are probably doing some biohack as well. I'm gonna give them the benefit of the doubt that they are doing something that the rest of us are not doing, or their body is adapting it so much better compared to a normal person who is lacking sleep. I cannot function if I sleep less than 6 hours. I think I can function 6 hours and above, 6 to 8 hours. That's my optimal sleep time. But anything less than that, I just crash afterwards. In terms of alcohol, I think the key, as you said, is the relationship, right? It's normalizing what is supposed to be unhealthy. When they say, okay, I don't think I drink too much, but if you look at an objective measure, that is actually a lot. It's about understanding that, and it's about understanding how it affects you in terms of productivity, how it affects sleep, for example, right? Some people, and there are studies that showed, like, if you drink right before you go to bed, it affects your sleep quality negatively, and that has been shown very, very clearly. And if that happens, how does it carry on forward for next day, right? Will it affect your productivity the next day? And clearly, when it comes to brain power, cognitive ability, making sure that you're making the right decisions, having the sharpness to assess a situation and therefore come up with a solution, all those are negatively impacted when you're intoxicated. So all in all, I think, I'm not going to say everyone stop drinking, because I think there's a big social aspect of alcohol in everyone's lives. So I would say drink responsibly, like a lot of people would say. I myself, I can't handle, I'm a lightweight, so it's easy for me, so I don't get to that point. But at the end of the day, I think do everything in moderation. Don't go, like you said, don't go all alcohol is bad, or don't go all like carb is bad, fat is bad, demonizing a certain one single group, because ultimately, like I said, metabolism is all about balance. It's all about moderation. It's all about fine-tuning what your body likes, what your body doesn't like, and what your body can use optimally in order to produce the results that you optimally want, in order to reach the goal that you want to reach.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm starting to get so many different questions now coming to the surface that I want to be mindful of your time and respect your time, because it seems like we're getting more into a mindset area of conversation, and that's a perfect way for me to see us, exiting this conversation and leaving it there, which is one of my favorite things to talk about. So with that being said, what is your take on perspective with these things? We talked about relationship with things, and we have a relationship with ourselves. We have our own mindset and our own, fixed or open mindset, as people refer to it as. So I know that's something you mentioned earlier is, philosophy of life and mindset. So I guess to kick things off, I'm curious to know, what really stood out to you in your life experiences that got you to consider your mindset and where it was and where you wanted it to be. And kind of just walk us through that. I think that'd be a good place to start.
I think my first wake-up call was, excuse me, my first wake-up call was losing my dad at the age of 17 to stroke. And he had a heart attack and an open heart surgery a few years before that. And then, realizing that life can be very transient. Life can be very temporary, right? And the more I learn about metabolism, the more I realize that I can change the way I live and my health. And most importantly, I can actually determine myself that when I age, I can age healthily or I can age in a sickly way, right? It's all about the quality of life that I want to lead when I'm at an age where I have increased risk of chronic diseases. Because no matter how healthy you are, how healthy you lead your life, age does increase the risk of diseases significantly, right? We can't fight that. What we can do is to maximize those days of high quality lifestyle as much as possible so that we can enjoy life and create memories that we can bring with us as we age. And to me, that is my life goal. And, you know, if one day I have to leave the world, I would think of it that way. Like, I have made these memories because I was healthy, I was able, and I was, you know, I could go around and see the world and meet these different people, speak to different people, share my experience, share my knowledge, and in turn, learning from these people like yourself as well. And I consider that my life fulfilled. So
yeah, I love that. And I mean, I think that's something that I really resonate with you, and just, you know, having conversations, I can't help but get into the mindset and perspective on life and purpose and values and things like that, because it's just been a big part of my life and what put me on the path I'm on today. And like I said earlier, you know, I'm very fortunate to be alive after all I've gone through. And I know I'm at higher risk of CTE and of Alzheimer's and all these things, just having one TBI, let alone however many I've had, and then the brain tumors and then seizures, which was a new part of my life experiences last year. So I, you know, for me, I've learned the value of a concept that was taught to me about being at cause for my reality rather than living at effect to my reality. And what that means to me is it's an equation to empowerment, right? Like, we can look at things that are happening in our lives to us or for us. We can say, you know, this is what's going on, not deny it, but say, okay, what is there to learn from this? How can I improve? That's how I look at everything that happens to me, whether it's labeled as good or bad. It's just like, okay, that happened. I'm going to feel whatever emotions come from it. I tried denying my reality before and that didn't work. So staying as neutral as I can and curious after I express those emotions, but say, hey, you know, how can I be better from this? How can I help other people? Rather than saying, oh, it's that person's fault or it's that thing's fault. It's like, let's take accountability for it.
I absolutely resonate with what you just said, because I look at events that happen in life. Every event is neutral. Whether it's positive or negative is your take on it, right? Things that happen to you, you can look at it, oh, now that's screwed up, and you know, this is really bad, and I'm gonna go into the it's gonna be really bad, leads to even worse scenarios. Or like you said, okay, I screw up this time, I'm gonna learn from this, and it's going to be better. And tomorrow is another new day. And one thing I learned is not to fear the unknown, that is the future. Because while you have your goal, right, your goal can still be malleable because we don't know what the future holds. You have your goal, you have your eyes on prize, you know, work towards it for sure. But if something or a predicament or challenge comes up and halts you in your path, don't be afraid to face it, and don't be afraid of the unknown what ifs, because whatever you can control is the present, and that is in your power entirely. And when you can control that, the next step you can also control. Do you know what I mean? Like, what's very common amongst people is that they get paralyzed when they overanalyze what if, you know, if I make this decision, what if it becomes worse? If I make this decision, what if I hurt myself, right? You just have to trust yourself to make the best decision you can make in the present and not worry too much about the unknown, because until you try it, it's not going to happen. And if you get paralyzed right here, you won't even have the chance to see the next stage.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's everything. Everything you just said, it resonates 100% with me, and it's a lot of what I talk about with anyone, especially on this podcast, about mindset and just the ability to focus on different things that's going to yield a specific type of emotion, which is going to influence how we show up in the world, and that's going to create a subjective reality. You know, I think it starts with our personality and understanding our belief structures, our mindsets, our perspectives, our values, our, you know, all these different pieces of our identity that create our personal reality that we experience on a day-to-day basis. And like you said, if we can be curious and stay neutral, that's not to say you're not going to get upset, you're not going to get angry or sad or depressed or anxious, whatever it may be. Yep. It's just looking at it as like, all right, I'm going to feel this. And then when we're ready to process it, let's look at this. Let's not apply meaning. Let's not judge it or label it as good or bad, which is something I learned to do over the years. It's like, okay, here's what's happening. What do I want to do moving forward? How do I make that happen? And let's keep that vision in sight, no matter how macro it is. Yeah. What do I want to experience moving forward? And how can I use this experience and leverage it moving forward?
And it's absolutely that, accepting and acknowledging your feelings as well. Like, don't deny yourself of that, right? Even though you are in control, you have feelings too. We're all humans, right? Acknowledge that, say that, okay, this makes me feel like this. How can I avoid it next time, right? And also you are in the power to change it, right? This has already happened. Okay, what can I change going forward, like you said? And that will make you feel better. So again, I think the theme of my talk today is like very in balance. It's about the balance again, like have the negative emotion and accept that side of you, but also push yourself to have a more positive experience. Balance that, because some people completely push that negative side away and deny a side of their humanity almost. And that is not ideal either, because when it breaks, right? All of that pent up negative emotion would just surge up, and sometimes it's too much to handle. So if you, along the way, accept those negative emotions and allow yourself to adapt to it, then the next bad thing that comes, you'll be much better equipped to face it. It's like hormesis. You expose yourself to a moderate amount of information, your body learns how to adapt to it and how to fix the next infection if it comes again. Same thing.
I love that. Beautifully said. And I think that's a great place to leave the conversation for today. And I definitely trust that we'll have some more conversations in the future, whether it's, on the podcast or in person. I'm looking forward to meeting you. And I want to thank you again for sharing the time with me today and to educating us on all things, metabolic health, mindset, and sharing your journey and really sharing your passion. And it's easy to see and to feel the passion that you have for what you do. And it's a pleasure to have connected, and it's an honor to share some time. And I'm looking forward to, what this relationship, yields for us moving forward and how it impacts the rest of the world.
Yeah. Pleasure's mine, Josh. It was so nice chatting with you. You made time feel so short. We've talked about so many things, and it's definitely an honor to be on your podcast as well.
Well, thank you.